Hello everybody and welcome back to the Not Applicable Formula 1 channel. I hope you are well and I hope you enjoyed this week's race. Thank you to all of you that joined me live for the race. I will be doing live reactions to all of the races this season, starting with Portugal again once we get into a couple of weekends' time. But I thought I would take this time to reflect on what we have seen, reflect on this race, Max Verstappen coming out on top, Hamilton and Norris, Leclerc, Sainz, talk through the teams, talk through everything that they did this race weekend and how it went well for some teams and how it really did not go well for others. So let's sort of dive into it and let's start with the Mercedes, still top of the Constructors' Championship and a very mixed bag of a weekend. I think Hamilton in particular will be disappointed but happy with his professionalism. Obviously, he got taken by Max Verstappen really early on in the race, coming down into the first couple of corners. Max Verstappen just looked electric off of the line. Wasn't really Hamilton's fault. Obviously, came into the chicane together, and I don't know why. Hamilton should have just given him the place, but I think he just really wanted to, stamp his authority at the beginning of the race. He knew exactly how difficult it was going to be to pass Max once he was in front of him, and obviously then got run over onto the speed bumps on the side of the track. Max obviously holding his position. He's more than entitled to do so. And the race just went sort of a little bit higgledy-piggledy for Hamilton from that point there. So it was tricky. We don't know whether he had real pace to catch Max Verstappen. It looked like he would have had at one point, and then there was obviously difficulties. Coming into the gravel was not a great look for Hamilton, especially when he just poked the car into the barrier. I don't think there's any better word of it. He just sort of gently poked the front wing into the barrier, just enough to break it. It had already been broken beforehand, and he just made sure that the job was completely done on it. But obviously, show his professionalism, didn't over-rev, reversed out of there. Got really lucky, I think, with the red flag. Obviously, that brought him back into contention and meant that he could unlap himself. And then from there, it was an exceptionally professional drive, something we expect from Hamilton week in, week out. Don't want to talk about Bottas for too long, so I'm going to talk about him a little bit later when I talk about the Williams drivers, but Bottas was atrocious. In a word, awful. My goodness, it was a poor race. And then obviously had that incident with George Russell and ended up just smashing into the wall. Wasn't really his fault, actually. We're going to talk about it, as I said, when I talk about George Russell, but yeah, he shouldn't be in that position anyway, right? Surely the Mercedes of Bottas should be nowhere near the Williams in 8th and 9th place, battling for those final points. Yeah, it just seemed like a really weird weekend for Bottas. He never seemed to get the heat into his tyres. He never really felt comfortable on the circuit. Never really looked like he was going to do any damage this weekend. And he was running at the back of the points. And I think if he'd have finished at the back of the points, that would have been a more than fair finish. He really didn't show his quality this weekend. Someone who did show their quality was Max Verstappen. He was electric. He was exceptionally good. As I said, off the start line, got himself into first position. And was it ever really in contention? I don't think so. Had that tiny little slip on the formation lap after the red flag. Could that have cost him? Possibly. But, he snapped back in straight away, realised that was happening, put himself back in first place, and just drove an incredible race. I mean, if you look at the statistics, finished 22 seconds in front of Hamilton, 23 in front of Norris. Like, by the end of the race, he could have given himself another pit stop if he really wanted to. He looked exceptionally quick, and all weekend, he looked pretty good. He was very, very disappointed with qualifying. I think that was fair enough, but, he showed his quality, showed that he was, more than willing to race against the Mercedes, more than willing to push Hamilton off the track, show that bit of composure. Really, really good race weekend for him. Talking about good race weekends, let's talk about Lando Norris, because Lando Norris was excellent. Lando Norris had, I think, the race weekend of his career, and I know that may be pushing the boat out a little bit. I think he had the best race weekend that he's had so far in his career. He showed so much pace in qualifying. I think everyone was hoping that he would be P3 after that qualifying, and then obviously because of the track limits, that just got taken away from him right at the end. But he really stamped his authority on this McLaren team. I think him and Ricciardo, it's going to be tough. Ricciardo's coming in, a very experienced driver, someone who's been to a couple of different teams now. Obviously, Ricciardo wants to come into McLaren and almost make it his own. But Ricciardo was probably thinking, if McLaren in the next couple of years are able to fight for a title, I want to be the one who is fighting for that title. I actually think it could be Norris that takes that position. Norris has been at McLaren for a long time now. He's got himself in that seat. He knows the car inside out. And yeah, this weekend, just shoot. He has that pace. He deserved that third place. And also, he's not, put out by the fact that Ricciardo is a little bit more experienced. Ricciardo actually had to get out of the way of Norris when Norris asked very politely on the radio, to be fair. You've seen drivers be a little more abrasive with that kind of language before. But actually, Norris had a really, really good weekend. Ricciardo, I think, will be disappointed. I said before the race on the live stream, the main goal for Ricciardo this weekend has got to be to stay in front of Norris. And he was never, ever going to be able to achieve that goal. Norris was so much quicker. Ricciardo just sort of fell away, as you can see from this at the end. I know that the times don't tell you everything, but when Norris is finishing P3, 23 seconds behind Max, and Ricciardo is nearly a minute behind Max, or 51 seconds, a whole 20-30 seconds behind Norris, it's got to tell you something. And yeah, Ricciardo didn't look comfortable again, isn't really sure of the car yet, I don't think, and as I said, I think Norris can really stamp his authority on this team and really show that he is the number one driver. Very quickly on the Ferraris, because I think they had a very, very good weekend, but very quietly. It's an excellent day at the office for them. I mean, Leclerc probably hoped for a podium at one point. I think without the red flag, we'd have probably seen Leclerc in second place. But yeah, he struggled to obviously keep Hamilton behind him. He needed to stay in that DRS range of Norris for a little bit longer to have any chance of keeping Hamilton behind him, but he just couldn't find that little bit of pace at the end, and I think a 4th place finish for them, and then a 5th place finish for Sainz, I think we'll be exceptionally happy with, considering he was in the gravel a lot this weekend. He had lots and lots of problems this weekend. Again, doesn't look 100% comfortable in the car, but I managed to wring out a performance, get those 10 points on the board, and I think if you'd have offered Ferrari a 4th and 5th place finish before the weekend started, they'd have probably taken that from you. So Sainz doing exceptionally well. I think doing actually a little bit better than Ricciardo at getting to grips with this new car. He said that it was like driving in a different formula, driving the Ferrari. So it's obviously going to take him a little bit of time. He's saying that, so we can give him the benefit of the doubt for maybe 3 or 4 races. But he was close to Leclerc. He showed pace. He obviously had those issues. It was his first time in the wet. I'm going to give Sainz a little bit of freedom there and a little bit of a, it was your first time driving the Ferrari in these kind of conditions. Fair enough. Next time you're in these conditions, I want to see a little bit more. I want to see less of those mistakes. I want to see you pushing a little bit more, maybe getting into a battle with Leclerc near the end of the race. Let's move on to the AlphaTauris because, my goodness, they got it wrong, right? So Gasly obviously goes out on the wets at the beginning of the race. He is hoping for an absolute downpour. Like, if there was a downpour and it absolutely rattled down with rain in the first couple of laps, Gasly is laughing. Everyone else has obviously got to come into the pits. He's already on the wets and he's actually going to be flying. I don't know what radars he was looking at, but it just continued to dry up and dry up and dry up. And at one point, I think Gasly was like 6 seconds slower than everyone else. At one point, we had Gasly behind Stroll, which is actually how it finished, which is a little bit weird. But yeah, we had Gasly behind Stroll. And Stroll was losing like 6 seconds a lap to everyone in front of that chain of cars because Gasly was so slow. And Stroll just couldn't really find a way past him. It was a little bit tricky, actually. Talking of the Aston Martins, let's talk about Stroll because he couldn't find his way past Gasly, and I was a little bit disappointed by that because Gasly was so slow, and I think it just shows that Aston Martin has got real underlying issues. When you're on the better tyre, you're on the better strategy, in theory, the Aston Martin should be a comparable car to the AlphaTauri, and he just did not look like passing at any point whatsoever. It was a really tough weekend, I think, for Aston Martin. I mean, coming to the grid, I think Stroll had the brake fire, so his brake ducts caught fire. Obviously, Vettel had to start from the pit lane. It all just went wrong for Aston Martin. As soon as it started raining, it really started pouring for Aston Martin. Unfortunately, not for Gasly. Talking of Vettel very quickly, I mean, it's just another race weekend fraught with difficulty for him. He really doesn't look comfortable in the car, had absolutely no pace in qualifying, didn't look very good in the car either. They took a massive strategy risk and, again, just sort of didn't pay off. Similar to Gasly, they tried to be the one car that was going for something a bit different. And I'm just really disappointed with Vettel at the minute. I think as a driver with loads and loads of experience, as a driver who all of the time we talk about as having this experience of driving in the wet, being a wet weather driver, being exceptionally good at finding those patches of grip here and there, it just didn't come to fruition with him. And I think it was a risky strategy. It didn't help him. Obviously, kind of sort of lost out because of the red flag, but also gained a little bit. It was a bit 50-50. He just had a bit of a rubbish weekend. I think it's going to be a good few weekends before we see Vettel in the points, and I think that's going to be tricky. Moving on to Alpine as we go down the grid. Just not a lot to say, really. 2 cars in the points. Obviously, Ocon finishing 9th, Alonso finishing 10th. I think they'll be happy with that. I think they were hoping this season they'd be a little bit quicker. They look a bit like they're going to be in no man's land. They look, obviously, a bit quicker than the Alfa Romeos, the Williams and the Haas's, but they don't look anywhere near sort of the McLarens, the AlphaTauris and the Aston Martins. It's going to be a bit of a weird season for them, I think. Maybe them and Aston Martin will get sort of jumbled up in that sort of no man's zone where you're not really fighting for anything in particular. But they'll be happy. Obviously, Ocon and Alonso both getting into the points because Kimi had that issue. And let's talk about Kimi then. I was gutted. I think Kimi is one of those drivers that you bring into a team because he's got that experience, because he knows the tracks inside out, he knows the rules inside out. And to get a 30-second grid penalty, so if we look at the actual statistics, he ended up finishing 94 seconds behind the lead, only cars behind him that had been lapped, and he was in the points. And just a silly mistake. So under the safety car, he effectively spun off, okay? So he was in 6th or 7th. He spun off. He joined the track back in 9th. And then when you're in that position, you have to stay in that position. Because you've spun under the safety car, we're still technically racing at that point. It's just racing behind the safety car. So he lost those positions. You can't overtake behind a safety car. And they absolutely slammed the hammer down on him. They gave him a 30-second penalty at the end of the race. It was silly from him. He should know the rules, right? He's the most experienced driver on the grid. He should have known the rules. He should have still got at least a point for Alfa Romeo, and that would have just set them apart. That would have given that little bit of breathing space that they would have had to the Williams and the Haas behind them, and even put them in contention with some of the Alpines at the moment. Alpine aren't picking up points at a huge rate of knots, and if Raikkonen would have been able to pick up like 4 points for finishing 8th, then we're looking at something where they actually could be in contention with the Alpines, at least for the first few races of the season. Let's talk Williams, because Williams had a really mixed weekend. So obviously, let's talk Latifi first. Dropped out of the race straight away. It was his fault, actually. I know lots of people wanted to jump onto Twitter and jump onto Mazepin. It was Latifi. He joined the track when he joined the track and Mazepin was trying to go past. He didn't really see Mazepin, just cut in front of him. And Mazepin couldn't do much, to be honest. He just hit Latifi, and Latifi spun off into the wall. Kind of Latifi's fault, in my opinion. But George Russell is the man that I want to talk about. He was right there with the Mercedes. Look at him bearing down on Bottas. He was so close. And I think he just had that little rush to his head. In my opinion, I know that lots of people have debated here and there whether it was Bottas's fault, whether it's Russell's fault. I think it was a bit of a racing incident. But I think a more experienced driver doesn't make that mistake, doesn't dip their tyres onto the wet grass and obviously lose that control. Bottas could have been a little bit more lenient, a little bit nicer, but obviously there is going to be this rivalry between Bottas and Russell this season. They're in contention to basically get the same seat in Mercedes. Bottas is trying to say, look, I'm not a number 2 driver, even though everyone's sort of, we got the point now. Hamilton is so much better than Bottas. And Russell is saying, well, look, if I can overtake Bottas and he's in the better car, surely I should be in the better car because I'm showing better pace than he is in the Williams, and why am I not in this Mercedes seat? And I think that got a little bit in his head. He was like, if I can overtake Bottas on the track, this will show Toto Wolff that I'm the next best thing, that I should be taking that position. So I think he sort of lunged up the outside, as I said, dipped his tyre on the grass, and then it was a bit of a 50-50. They're coming together. It wasn't really his fault. He'd completely lost track of the car. Bottas couldn't really get out of the way. Yeah, it was tough. Bottas shouldn't have been in that position anyway. Bottas should have been much further up the field, as we know, of a Mercedes car. And, Russell was driving an exceptionally good race. And I think, just a little bit of rush of blood to his head. A little bit of, look, if I can show that I am the next best thing, I am the one to take that seat, then maybe they'll put me in a little bit earlier. And it was tricky for him, He tried his best, but didn't really have the pace. Finally, Haas then. Mick Schumacher, again, I think actually showed a little bit of quality, a little bit of patience. Obviously, he lost his front wing, he had that crash, but he's settled down. I think, really, with a rookie driver, we could have seen something drastic. We could have seen him, completely fly off the handle, just jump out of the car, panic, worry. But instead, his technician talked to him. They talked him through the procedures. He ended up having to do 2 or 3 laps with no front wing. He still brought the car around, still brought the car home, got that front wing changed, and still finished in front of Mazepin. So it was a professional weekend for Mick Schumacher, a really big learning curve for him, and I think he adjusted to it quite well. He's never going to be fighting for those top spots. He's never really going to be fighting for the points this season, but he did enough to show his quality. Overall then, I'm going to say Max definitely deserved the win, an exceptionally professional performance from Hamilton. Then losing down the field, Norris has absolutely stamped his authority on that McLaren. He is the McLaren driver at the moment. Until Ricciardo can really show that he deserves to be up there, I think Norris is just going to take that position and be, the driver for now. Ferrari looked very, very quick. I'm actually really surprised by Ferrari this season. Gasly just needs a race where he can actually get some pace down on the track. He actually needs a race where he can show that he can turn that qualifying pace into race pace. Didn't talk about Tsunoda, actually. I think it was a bit of a nothing race from Tsunoda. Started from the back, then spun out, had issues with track limits, got that penalty. Yeah, it wasn't really a good weekend for Tsunoda. Overall, it was one of those, maybe we'll chalk that down as him being a rookie, learning the weekend, learning the track. Bit of a difficult one for him. But as we move down the track, I think it was an exceptional race. It was one of those races that's going to go down in history as amazing to watch. And I really, really enjoyed it. As I said, I will be live for the Portuguese Grand Prix, so make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you know when I am going live for that. Thank you so much for watching. If you could leave a like, that would be absolutely exceptional. And I will see you next time.